Welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast, where executive coach Alicia Cowan will discuss leadership topics and coaching solutions to tackle the most difficult problems that keep you from leading your team to success.
Friends, it's Alicia Cowan, and I am recording the very first episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast for you. It is in December 2022, and I am thrilled to be starting this podcast because I have been thinking about this massive goal of mine for about 2 years now. So it's been a long time in the making, and I'm really just excited to start getting some of this content that I've been thinking of for the past few years out of my head. So I'm going to share a couple of things with you in this first episode. Definitely want to give you a little bit of a sneak peek of who I am and what I do, but really then just want to really dive into some content and really start just working on giving you some coaching content. And so a little bit about me. I am an executive coach. I've been coaching for about 2 or 3 years now and started my business about 2 years ago and worked my way through corporate America, through being a manager myself and managing large teams of people and multiple locations across multiple states and lots of different areas of the country. And then transitioned into more of the recruiting space, still managing a team that was located all across the US, but really in a different function and supporting the business and a recruiting function, and really got a chance to recruit around the world in multiple different countries and multiple different cultures, and really learned what it meant to hire great talent. And then I got to transition again into an HR support function, or as a business partner. Still managing a team of people, but really in a capacity to support and understand the business and then align the people strategy and the people functions with what that business strategy looked like, and loved it and really got a taste of just understanding how to marry my love of business and my love of supporting people together. Then I found coaching. And for me, coaching was something that started as a great tool that helped support me personally. I found the Life Coach School podcast and my coach, Brooke Seo, and really took all the tools that I was learning through this podcast. And at first, it took a while for me to kind of understand and absorb the tools. But once I started really applying them and really understanding how they worked, how my brain worked, I started applying these tools and completely, massively changed my life for the better, both personally and professionally, and fell in love. So I knew that I was passionate about this work, right? And I think I had so many just unlocks to my brain that I felt really inspired to share with others what I had learned. So I got certified to be a coach at the Life Coach School, and then started my business and started bringing this knowledge and these tools to individuals. And a lot of the individuals that I work with and coach are executives themselves. They're a lot of times in the C-suite. They are coaching or leading large teams. And the coaching that we do together really helps them influence and impact really large teams of people. And I have this goal: the more people that I can impact through this work, I truly believe that it makes our workplaces and our culture better. And so having it, had lots of bosses myself, I know the power of having a really amazing leader. And that's my goal, is really to help leaders be the best that they can be, and in the hopes that they can ultimately impact our workplace. And so that's why I do what I do. So that's a little bit about me and my background from a professional standpoint. From a personal standpoint, I am also married to an amazing husband. I have 5 amazing kids with him, and we live in Wesley Chapel, Florida. So we are in the process of really building a home here. We moved here earlier this year from Ohio, and we are building our dream house. And so we're working on that process, and it's just been a wild adventure moving here and transitioning back into Florida, because I grew up here for most of my life in the Orlando area. So getting used to it. So it's December, as of the time I'm recording this. And so it being 80 degrees in the middle of December is something to get used to after living in Ohio for quite a long time. And living all over the country, I forgot what it was like to live in Florida. So I'm still getting adjusted and still kind of settling in and getting used to it. So that's a little bit about me. So let's dive in. So like I mentioned, I discovered a lot of different coaching tools as I had started to study with Brooke Castillo and the Life Coach School. And I want to talk about a little bit about one of the foundational tools that I learned and really how that impacts leaders and leadership. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is the concept that feelings are ultimately driving every single result that we have in the workplace. So I want to start off with a couple of things here. I think there's a lot of times that we've heard, and perhaps you've come across this in your experience, but a lot of times we hear that feelings and emotions don't have a place in the workplace. And I've heard that before. You got to kind of check all of those feelings or your emotions at the door and leave those behind as you cross the thresholds of the organization, whether you're working virtually or in person. But you hear that thought process of kind of just like leaving everything behind and coming in and just, focusing on the work. And I'll say, what I've learned is that is just a total lie. And I think what we mean when we say that, I think the intention of that concept is good, right? So I think what we're trying to say is, if you typically are feeling some negative emotion, right? So if you are really angry or frustrated, or perhaps maybe sad and upset, right? At times, we're asking that emotional maturity comes into play when you come into work, that you don't act on that anger or that sadness and, I guess, quote unquote, take it out on people in the workplace. I think that, again, that intention of professional emotional maturity is at the root of that. But we don't necessarily say that. So I think it gets misconstrued, right? This whole like checking your emotions at the door. And what I want to say is that if we have humans in the workplace, the concept of like leaving emotions behind is ludicrous, because if you have humans running the business, if you have humans within the business, unless they're like, again, not using their brains whatsoever, they are experiencing emotion and they are having feelings. So I think what we need to like kind of rephrase and we can reconstruct this concept is to think that there are some emotions that we want to fuel our day, we want in the workplace, and we do them. We have these emotions and they're fueling our results all the time, whether or not we acknowledge it or not. So some positive emotions that we may want to harness, and what we may want to say is there's things like determination, right? Determination absolutely can be a positive emotion, quote unquote, positive emotion to fuel and use throughout the day, or feeling focused, or feeling energized, or feeling motivated, right? There's lots of those that we don't necessarily call out as something that we want to fuel our day. And we don't necessarily, say, bring that emotion. But I think it's just understanding how our brains work and how our thought process works. So that's what I want to break down. So the first point I want to make here is just that understanding that emotions and feelings, as we call them, are absolutely fueling our results. So we're going to talk about a little bit how that breaks down here, but I want to make sure that we kind of start to reframe and start to just like, again, start to just maybe marinate on the thought of what we mean when we say that, and really challenge that assumption of what we need to check our emotions and check everything at the door. Okay. Totally impossible to do. Okay. So we need to rephrase what we're really, really meaning there. So let's dive in. So how does that work? So we're going to go over a concept called the model, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. Now, this is something that, again, it's a tool that I use in coaching all the time. Sometimes I call it out that I'm using this model. Sometimes I just coach using the model and help people work through it. I'm going to teach it to you today because I think in this format, we can always come back to it, and you can always like re-listen to this and rethink through it and think about how it applies to your life. All right, so let's dive into the different aspects of the model. And for those of you that are watching me on YouTube, I've got it on a whiteboard right behind me. And for those of you guys that are not watching this live, I'm going to describe it to you. So I will take you through this audibly as well. All right. So the model. I think, when I first learned this concept from, again, my coach, Brooke Castillo, she admitted that, this is, a concept that she put together and formulated the different lines of the model in a way to just organize truly, though, the way the world works. While she did not, say that she came up with necessarily the concept of how it works, she definitely took this and made it in a way, broke it down in a way that made it easier for us to understand using these different lines of the model. And I completely agree. It really helps understand and break down, again, the way the world works. And so breaking it into these different lines and thinking about it in this way really helped me think about my leadership, my management style, my work environment, and in such a way that really put things in perspective for me. So I'm going to teach you this concept of the model, and hopefully you'll find it helpful as well. So we're going to break it down line by line, and then I will give you an example of how this kind of shows up for my clients and, show you an example of how you can use it. So let's start with the circumstance line. So the first line of the model is what we've dubbed the C line or the circumstance line. The circumstance line could be just defined as anything in the world that is outside of our control, anything that could be proved as factual, that could be proven in a court of law, something that we observe. So it could be something with inanimate objects, or it could be with humans. So it could be such things as like traffic or the weather or market conditions, or it could be behavior in another person. So things people do or things people say. A lot of times that shows up for us in the workplace is our circumstance is other people and other coworkers. So that's a good example of that. So that's the circumstance line, something out there in the world that is completely neutral. Okay. The thought line. The next line is the T line. And the thought line is how we as humans give meaning to the circumstances that we're encountering in the world. It's how we interpret the world. So we have, I think I've read somewhere that you have anywhere between 40 to 60,000 thoughts that you are thinking every day. And some of those are voluntary, some of those are involuntary. Okay. So the sentences that are running through our brain, again, are how we're thinking about our circumstances in the world. So for issues that we're encountering, it always comes back to our thought process and how we're thinking about the issue. Okay. So this is an important line for us, how we're thinking, our thoughts. That's a T line. The next line of the model is the F line. That's the feeling line. This is the emotions and the vibrations that we're feeling in our body as triggered by the thoughts that we're having. So it's absolutely something that is triggered by our thought and not the circumstance. The circumstance, again, is completely neutral. The thought is what's driving how we're feeling about it. And a lot of times we think the inverse. We think it's, again, a reaction to a circumstance, but truly it's how we're interpreting and how we're thinking. If you ever hear someone say, he or she made me so mad, or he or she made me so upset, as if the other person had the control over how you feel and they have the power to make you feel a certain way. Again, we know that's not true. That is actually our thoughts and how we're thinking about it, not necessarily how that other person is forcing us to feel. Okay. That's a tricky one to wrap your brain around. So let that sit for a second. These feelings, they're not to be confused with involuntary responses or, reactions like hunger, again, out of our control, or pain, right, as a response to not mental pain and anguish, but physical pain, like if we put our hand on a hot stove, for example. So not to be confused with that, but truly the feeling when we are thinking a thought. Okay. All right. Then the next line of the model is the action line, the A line, as we call it. This is anything that could be referred to as a behavior. This is any action that we take or don't take based on how we're feeling. So some people believe that we choose how we act despite how we feel. So this is when you say someone's kind of being inauthentic, or not being true to themselves, is when we think, okay, I may feel a certain way, but I'm going to act and cover it up a different way. That's when that kind of shows up as inauthenticity. And a lot of people think that we can cover that up, but I promise you it will come out in some way, shape, or form. But this is the action line. So there can be lots of different actions that take place as a result of a feeling. So that's why, again, if you're watching this on video, you see actions with an S with a parentheses around it. The action, again, could be something that we are doing or not doing as a result of our feeling. And then those actions will ultimately produce a result. That's our R line. The R line is the direct result of how we're thinking. So this R line will prove our thoughts true. Okay. So that one's a tricky one to wrap your brain around. So simply this result, the R line, it's at the effect of our actions. And again, some people believe that our circumstances are absolutely producing the results, right? So other people, market conditions, traffic, weather are absolutely driving the result. Not the case. So let's review that again to talk through it. So we have this neutral circumstance that's occurred in our life. We have our thoughts, our sentences of how we're thinking about it and how we are interpreting it. That thought triggers the feelings in us. It drives how we're feeling about that circumstance, which causes us then to either take action or not take action based on how we're feeling. And then that ultimately produces a result. Okay. So like I said earlier, this concept took me a long time to kind of wrap my brain around. Some people get this right away. I've taught this concept to people and they're like, oh yeah, totally know that this is how the world works. For me, it was eye-opening and revolutionary the first time I heard it. And I kind of had to really kind of practice thinking about this model. And still, again, I continue to work through models today if I'm challenged for something or having issues. So okay, so we're going to run through an example of the model at work. So I'm going to use an example of someone feeling the imposter syndrome. Okay, so the imposter syndrome and feeling like I'm not good enough to be here and part of this group is a thought. So I'm going to take you through an example that, again, it's pretty typical for a lot of leaders that I work with to feel the imposter syndrome at some point within their career. Again, I have a lot of leaders that lead really large teams. They are taking on bigger and bigger roles within bigger organizations and really putting themselves out in front of large groups. And at times, imposter syndrome pops up. It seems to be a theme across, again, lots of different leaders that I work with. So I'll give you an example of how this could work within the model. So let's say the circumstance, again, our neutral circumstance is that there is a leader sitting with other leaders at a table. Okay. So maybe a boardroom table, and there are lots of C-suite level leaders within the room. So a thought that sometimes occurs is, I don't belong here. Again, that's the person's thought. This is how they're interpreting the situation. Again, no one's telling them that within the room. No one's coming out and saying, you don't belong here, right? Just you have leaders, neutral circumstance, just sitting in the room. And the thought that the person is having about being within this crowd, or being within this, this setting is, I don't belong here. The feeling is inadequate, or feeling like an imposter, perhaps, but the feeling that's coming from that thought is inadequate. The actions is perhaps withdrawing, not speaking up, withholding their thoughts or feelings, or withholding from sharing, basically withdrawing, right? And then the result is they're proving that thought true by saying, I don't belong here, by not engaging and showing that they are worthy. They are 100% worthy. And there's a reason why they were selected to be in the position that they're in, and showing that worth through that engagement, right? So again, this is hypotheticals, this is an example, but again, I think it's something that comes up a lot is this thought. We call it overall imposter syndrome, but a lot of times the thought is something that boils down to I'm not good enough, or I don't belong here, or I don't have a place where I'm at. And ultimately, this drives this feeling of, again, defeat or inadequacy or feeling like an imposter. And the actions typically don't stem from, or stemming from this thought, don't lend themselves, right, to leaning in and engaging and participating and showing the value that they can bring to the table, right? And then that result, again, the result that they're producing as a result of that thought and feeling is proving that thought true, right? So it's not showing that the value and not showing that they do belong in the room. And I'll tell you, this again may sound bleak, but there is good news to this, because I think the more we just understand how our brain works, right? And the reasons that we think the thoughts that we do, sometimes there is meaning behind it. Sometimes our brain is just involuntarily offering us these thoughts because it's trying to ultimately protect us and keep us safe. But the more that we work through this and coach through this, the more we can then, one, understand how our brain works. And then two, we get to ultimately decide if these thoughts come up, do we want to continue to think them? Or do we want to indulge those thoughts? Or do we just recognize those thoughts occur? I see my brain trying to keep me safe. And why I say that is because, again, sometimes we have instinctual primal thoughts of trying to stay safe and not put ourselves out there and not separate ourselves from the crowd. It's just instinctual. We'll talk more about that in future podcasts. But there's a lot of times our brains are just involuntarily offering these thoughts. And we get to decide, do we want to allow our brain to run on default, to continue to think these things, to just run wild with all these thoughts? Or do we want to just pause and say, do I want to continue to think that? Is that actually true? Is that factual? And decide, right? And so coaching does that. Helps, again, this has helped me change my life, truly, to understand how to use the power of your thoughts and the power of your feelings. And you get to decide what you want to think and feel on purpose rather than just being in default mode, right? And I think a lot of the times we are just in default, running off of the thoughts and the feelings that we just like encounter day to day and what comes up for us. And rather than really examining and looking at what's going on for us. And again, we have 40 to 60,000 thoughts. We're not looking at all of them, but if there's ones that are problematic or that reoccur that seem to not give us the results that we want, that's where maybe we dig in and take a moment. So, okay, we covered a lot. So we've covered feelings in the workplace. We've talked about what those feelings are coming from by explaining the model. And now you're probably thinking, okay, what do I need to do with this? So great way that I work with clients. And when we first start working together, sometimes I just, as I'm talking them through how this model works, it's just in the moment, not needing to feel one, like anything's gone wrong, or like you need to beat yourself up for thinking these thoughts. Sometimes you just need to recognize them. And the easiest way to recognize and look at the thoughts that you're thinking is in the moment. If you feel something problematic come up for you, write it down and physically write it down on a piece of paper. If you get these thoughts out of your head and you're like, okay, let me take a look at them. There's something to like the power of like looking at them on a physical piece of paper. We call it the thought download as a coaching tool, but it's nothing more complicated than a blank piece of paper where you just really let everything out that you're thinking and physically get it out on paper. And what's really powerful about this exercise is it feels really simple, overly simplistic, in fact. But what's really powerful about it is when you actually look at those words on paper, you can kind of see them outside of yourself, right? And I think that's a lot of what we do in coaching is just like having an objective viewpoint. You can do this on your own by taking a look at them and thinking, wow, is that true? Do I really want to think that? Again, if I'm sitting in a boardroom and feeling like I'm not enough, again, this may not be an exercise that you do in front of all of your colleagues at the time, but if you notice them and you can recall that thought later, again, helpful if you're writing that down to take a look at it. Is this something I want to continue thinking? Is this truthful? Really, and just taking a look at it and having that power, that knowledge really is just the first line of awareness. And it really helps to kind of start to kickstart this journey of really understanding your brain and knowing how it works. And so this is the quick first lesson that I just wanted to talk to you about today, because again, understanding how our brain works and how we are thinking in the workplace, how we're feeling, again, knowing that ultimately is driving our results. It also is impacting our results across the organization based on how our colleagues and how our team is thinking and feeling. So knowing that, so powerful. And then we can start to explore what's next for us and how we want to harness this information and use this information within the workplace. So that's what I have for you today. If you ever want to dive further into this work or talk more about it, it is what I love to do and I'm passionate about. So please feel free to reach out to me. I have one-on-one and group coaching practices where I really dive into this with leaders within organizations. And really, we just start to transform the workplace. So my website, it's EliciaCowanCoaching.com. And you spell that EliciaKeown coaching.com. And again, it's so great to talk to you for the first time. And there will be more to come. We're going to publish this every other week with content that you can, again, absorb, take away, do some actionable things within your workplace right away. So thank you so much for listening, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast with Alicia Cowan. If you're ready to have an executive coach who's ready to help you lead your team to success, then book an introductory call at aliciacowancoaching.com/call.